Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolford. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stitch Please podcast. We are the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm joining you today on recording this episode on June 2nd. The episode will release on June 3rd of 2020. I mentioned that date because time and timing is important. We are in the midst of global uprisings against white supremacist police violence. We are also in smaller uprisings in our own neighborhoods, communities, jobs, schools, affinity groups that Black women are in some ways also in uprising in this because it's just a lot, y'all. It's just a lot. And I can just be 100% honest with you. I do not have the capacity at this point to talk about this in the way that it deserves. And so what I want to do is to point out a few things and to direct you to what's going to be happening next. But I am overwhelmed and exhausted, and I have been that way for quite some time. Of course, to quote Fannie Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I do have to say that I woke up this morning. I went to bed at 6:30 a.m., woke up 3 minutes after my class that I'm teaching is supposed to start, got down there at 1:05 in record time, and have been going like pretty much all day ever since, running on very empty tanks. And so, as I start this episode for today, and the episode is going to be about thinking or shopping outside the fabric store, about a variety of resources that you can use and pull from beyond going to a big box fabric store to get materials. It just felt like I had to say to the Black women sewists out there who are learning new and unfortunate things about the white friends and white companies in their lives, I just have to tell you that I see you, I love you, I am you. I have absolutely been there. I definitely know the feelings of betrayal, the feelings of surprise, the feelings of knowing someone for so many years and then realizing that that same person could not care less if your own children got killed in the street. They wouldn't think about it one way or another. That they're afraid to say that Black Lives Matter. They refuse to say it. And so this is the basic minimal for me, I would think. And so one of the reasons that I started Black Women Stitch was because I refused to sew with anyone who could not say that Black Lives Matter. Period. That was one of the absolute baseline motivations, that I did not ever want to feel that I had to trade my full humanity or my ability to just be my whole full self in exchange for doing something that I loved. And so we will be back in a week or so to talk about this in more detail. I've got an amazingly brilliant, beautiful crew at Black Women Stitch, and we're going to come and do a special episode talking about this, holding this space, showing what community looks like in the coming week. But for now, I wanted to direct people to just a couple of things. If you want to learn more about where I'm at in terms of my perspective, if you want to hear from me, I have an IGTV video that I recorded on May 30th. And that is about a protest action that I attended on Saturday, May 30th. And when we got back from the protest, I sat down and did like a 23-minute debrief kind of discussion on Instagram Live, and I ended up saving that. So if you want to learn more about my perspective on that and to hear about what I think is currently happening, I just urge you to check that out on my IGTV. I also have an episode that I recorded earlier on this year, and it's called Stitching Truth to Power, Quilting and White Fragility. And this is about a controversy with a quilt block involving the National Quilt Museum in Paducah and the Social Justice Sewing Academy out of California. And I talk about that controversy and what it reveals about the quilting community. And so I just want, and also one last thing is that I will be talking about this on Thursday during my regular Instagram Live. I do an Instagram Live on Thursdays at 3 p.m. and my plan is to be there like always and to hold space to have this conversation and to acknowledge and affirm Black women in a time such as this. I created Black Women Stitch as a way of building something that I needed. And it turned out that other people needed it too. And I'm really happy to be here to center Black women, girls, and femmes in sewing, to say, sis, I see you, I hear you, and you do not have to walk through this alone. For today's episode, we are thinking outside the fabric store. I was thinking outside the box, and by that I meant thinking outside the big box store, because it's interesting to think about all the other places that we might source materials and things for our sewing. And so because I like to make lists, I have a long list of different places where you can buy things that are relevant and useful and sustaining for your sewing. And that includes a place you probably never, ever thought of about getting fabric. So I'm happy to share that with you. So I have actually a list of 7 places, and I put them in alphabetical order about where we can find materials to sew or to support our sewing. And so the first half of the episode, we're going to talk about art supplies, automotive, camping, and grocery stores. These 4 places where you can go and get things that are going to be related to your sewing. Yes, I did say the grocery store. And then we'll take a quick break, and I will announce the winners of the Yes You Can Make a Bra contest. We've got 4 sponsors, Designs by Tosh, Bra Builders, Emerald Erin Sews, and Stitch Love Studios. And we have 4 winners who I hope are listening to this episode so that when your name is called, you can contact me, send me a direct message, and I will connect you with the prize and with ways to get it. If you don't hear this message and you have until Friday to contact me, and then I'll go to the next set of winners. But I'm hoping that folks whose name I'm about to call after the break will be listening to the episode. So then after the break, as I said, that's when we get into the hardware store, the medical supply store, and the 7th thing is thrift stores. And I could talk a tiny bit about variety stores, but I feel like if I started talking to you all about what you could sew with at the Dollar Tree, that's a whole different episode. It's true. Like you think about, well, no, I'm not going to start at the end, but there's a lot of places that you can go to source materials beyond a big box fabric store. So to jump right in, the art supply store. Now, I'm going to refrain from mentioning brand names or the names of particular shops because I don't work for any of them, so I don't know why I need to be pumping up what their businesses are. But I just wanted to let you know that if you have a hardware store, if you have an art supply store, I will probably mention a few names, but I just want to be careful about that. So the first thing I would think about is if you have an art supply store, if you have a favorite art supply store, and I don't mean an art supply store like arts and crafts that is together, though I guess that would also be fine if that was all you had, but I mean like art supply stores where people who are trained in fine arts and in crafts and paintings and sculpture, where they go to get their stuff from. Those are the kind of stores I'm talking about. We used to have one right here in Charlottesville, and I really liked it. And I just said you shouldn't think about it as an arts and crafts store, but this was a little tiny store, y'all, and it was an art store upstairs. And then downstairs, it had scrapbook paper. It had an Ellison machine, if you remember what those are. And because for me, it had cake decorating supplies. And maybe you didn't know, but I am also a cake decorator. I used to decorate cakes. I do it a lot less now, but when the kids were little, I did roll fondant. I did the Wilton course. I made my own fondant from scratch because pre-made fondant was disgusting. I made it from scratch using like boiled marshmallows. And so anyway, they had a whole section on cake decorating there. But here, if you have an art supply store near you, and you might already have your favorite or one nearby, here's a couple of things that you can get from an art supply store that can help support your sewing. One thing is the Sorall paper. I know I've mentioned Sorall before. Again, no affiliation, but I might throw in some links to my Amazon site of some of these supplies, because the Sorall paper is really good. It's that double-sided wax-free paper. They sell it in the art supply store in sheets as well as in rolls. You can also get really good measuring tools like T-squares, which are useful, curved rulers, French curves. We know French curves are good for doing hip curves, for blending between sizes of pattern. They also have gridded rulers, and gridded rulers are also really good because I can tell you that I was pretty much close to today years old before someone told me that, actually I believe it was two folks from Black Women Stitch who were saying that one of the reasons that it's good to measure your body in quarters, and they had said this to me more times than one, but I can be a little slow, and they said you measure your body in quarters because the pattern pieces that you buy are in quarters. And I was like, I have been cutting garments on the fold for more than 20-something years, right, to cut a bodice out, not realizing that what I was looking at was 1/4 measurement of my body. Like, mind blown, But yes, and so the gridded rulers become really useful for measuring the pattern pieces and then measuring those comparisons to the measurements you make on your body, as well as the curved ruler is really good. I have some curved rulers, but I want to get another one that's really long. I believe you want a curved ruler. Mine is blue. It has numbers on it. It's really good for bra making to measure like your underbust and your bust cup depth, those kind of things. But if you have a longer one, they're very good for measuring and tracing a good crotch line for a pair of pants. And so just to kind of keep that in mind, that these are some of the things that you can get at an art supply store, as well as some good paper for tracing. They have paper that feels like pattern paper. There's a lot of things you can find if you're just wandering around. If you're adventurous and you want to do some fabric decorating or fabric dyeing, they have the dyes and the resists and the things that you need to do that. And they also, based on closer to my skill level, have really good fabric markers, because I am not about to pretend that I have skills enough to dye a fabric in a way that it's going to come out consistently every time. And usually when I've been dyeing fabric, it's because I get fabric that have white people on it and I want to make them brown. And so then I use a Sharpie and have terrible results, and then I'm extra sad. And so they sell fabric markers that will help you diversify some of your fabrics if you want to. Let's see. So the next thing I have is the automotive store. Now, this is something that is very unusual, that there are things in the I guess it's because, when I was a kid, I used to get dragged around to what felt like 50, 11 stores with my mother. And I always had to find something fun to do or something to what she would say, occupy yourself. Because if we were misbehaved in a store, there were several layers of consequence, right? We could occupy ourselves by just wandering through the store, the three of us, me and my two sisters together, because, we're not going to just be running around. Or we could sit and be quiet, boring. Or we could not sit and be quiet, act up, and then get in some serious trouble when we got home. So it's the idea of looking at every store and finding something that I want to do while she does what she wants to do or what she needs to do is really one of the big motivators for me, trying to, everywhere I go, I want to figure out, what can I do to occupy myself in this place that is now boring? Which is really funny because I took her to the fabric store 2 years ago, and she was really ready to go the whole time, and she was complaining. And I was like, it's your turn. Now you have to sit there. Because I drove. But the automotive store has one thing in particular. There's other things, of course, I know some folks have been really liking the blue shop towels, using those for making masks, using those as filters for masks. So those have been really popular. But the main thing that I love from the automotive store, in addition to certain small wrenches and small tools, is this one thing. And I wish that I had done the research to find out what exactly it's called. But I'm going to describe it as a retractable magnet. And it's the purpose of it is it's telescopic, and they might even call it a telescopic retractable magnet. Again, if I have time, I can look it up and put a link to it in the show notes. But one of the things I really like about this is that it's a tool that mechanics use when they're repairing a car engine, and they might drop a screw or a tool or something down into the base of the engine they're working on, or maybe it falls out onto the floor or something. But they can extend this telescopic magnet, and I'm holding it in my hand right now, trying to keep it away from my computer. But you can hold it in one hand. It telescopes to 25 inches, and it can hold up to 4 pounds. And the reason this is so good is that it's good if you drop a pin on the floor. That's the only reason. It's a one-use implement. But if you drop a pin on the floor and you are sitting down, because it extends more than 2 feet, that's how far it measures. It allows you to pick up this pin from the floor, or a Wonder Clip. It works with Wonder Clips too. It allows you to pick that up without leaning over and risk falling, or to leave it on the ground and step on it. Both of which I have done. I have both leaned over to pick up a pin and either narrowly fallen, or I have stepped on it and found it that way. But the automotive store has the retracting or retractable telescoping magnet. And I know a bunch of sewing stores have a tool that's like a little wand, but it's so small and it doesn't retract very far that you end up leaning out. And, I don't know, I just find that this one from the automotive store is just so much better. So let's talk about the camping store. Now, I've been to a camping store one time, and only for this reason. Because I have a confession to make, I am not about the outdoors. I know that we are in a season where many people are sick of being inside. I am not one of those people. I'm not a big fan of nature. My sister really enjoys this kind of thing, and she wants us to rent an RV and go cross country, and we could stay in it. And I was like, no, and more no, because I like being inside. However, there are things at the camping store that are really cute and very fun tools to use. The two things that I'm interested in are the organizational tools. And one thing that I really want to get that I'm very interested in is a special type of toolbox. Now, I can talk about the toolbox when I get to the hardware section, but the camping section, the camping store has a tackle box, which people use for fishing. Now, I feel like I'm explaining this, and everybody in the world knows what a tackle box is. And the idea of me explaining what a tackle box is to somebody is pretty hilarious, considering I don't like the outdoors and I find fishing really boring. But the tackle box, one of the reasons that I want to get one is I like how it's a multi-level organizational system with trays for different things. And when you open it up, one tray lifts up and pushes back. And so one of the reasons that I want a tackle box, actually, is because I want to use it to organize my bra making supplies. One of the things that I really like about my own sewing is to organize my tools in such a way that I can see everything at once, but not have it be spread all over the place. And so to have a tackle box, I thought I could have a box and I could open it up and I can look into it and say, okay, well, I've got these rings, I've got these sliders, I've got this much strap, I've got this much of the 2 hook for the back and this much for the 3 hook in the back. And, I guess I could put the underwires like in the bottom part of the box. I don't know. I don't have a toolbox yet. A tackle box yet. But I thought it was really a pretty clever idea. People also use it to organize beads and things like that. So, or you can even organize your snaps. But having some kind of cool organizational box that has everything you need in one place is something I'm really looking forward to when I get a chance to go to the camping store and get a tackle box. Oh, another thing people use sometimes, and I've never done this, but they use fishing wire or fishing line to do hems because it's a special type of hem that you can do with the with fishing line, and you can get that at a camping store too. So that's the camping store. The next place is a place that most of us visit pretty regularly, and that's the grocery store. The grocery store, believe it or not, has a couple of things that are useful for your sewing. The first thing is, just in alphabetical order, is freezer paper. Freezer paper is a product that feels like paper on one side and is shiny on the other side. It comes, at least the stuff I have, comes in a blue box, maybe made by Reynolds, I think. I'm not sure. But freezer paper is designed to wrap meat in so that you can put it in the freezer and it doesn't get frostbite. Because one side is shiny, it's not going to stick to the food, but it's close enough to it that there's no separation between the paper and the cold. So when you open it up, it doesn't peel apart. We did this. Me and my son have been making homemade ice cream sandwiches. So I made cookies, and then we took the ice cream and put it in there, and then we wrapped up the sandwich in freezer paper. And so those sandwiches are really good. Now I'm actually hungry. But you can use, the reason that I like freezer paper is that it's excellent for making reusable patterns because you can iron your freezer paper to your fabric and use it to cut and use it as a reusable template. So when I make bras, for example, I actually bought some freezer paper sheets, and I can put the link to this in the show notes. The freezer paper sheets that can run through your printer. So you put the sheet of paper in the printer. You print it off your inkjet printer. I would not use a laser because a laser printer gets really hot. But on your inkjet printer, you put the freezer paper in. It prints on the paper side. You cut out the pattern. You iron that pattern piece to your fabric. And I've done this with cotton fabric. I've done it with Duoplex. I've done it with sheer mesh. I've done it with a variety of fabrics. You iron it. Use your rotary cutter or scissors. The rotary cutter is really great for bra making, especially a little one. And it does a really great job. And that way you can avoid pinning. It allows you to sew. It allows you to cut out a pattern without having to use pins or pattern weights. It'll stick there, and then when you peel it off, it comes away with no residue, and it is reusable until the sticky stuff stops sticking. So if you make like a little bag or a little pouch or a little purse, and you say, sometimes you have a pattern and it asks you to print it out over like 4 or 5 pages because of all the different components, you can print that on freezer paper, and it will be a really cool reusable pattern that you could have for quite a while, and you can make several projects with it without it losing its stick. Another cool thing you can get at the grocery store in the same section as the freezer paper is parchment paper. Parchment paper is a almost translucent, sort of transparent. No, it's translucent. You can't really see through it, but it is almost like, it feels very Teflon-y. It's nonstick. It's a nonstick paper. And you use parchment paper for baking, especially for baking cookies. I like it for cookies because it makes the cleanup really easy. I used to also put it in the bottom of my cake pans because I could pop the cake out of the pan and just peel the parchment paper off. It's very good for things that are like cheesy or messy, and the parchment paper keeps it from being sticky and messy. And so, like, if you're like when I would do dip caramel apples, for example, you can dip the caramel apple or the red candy apple on the parchment paper, let it dry, and then it'll peel right off. This is really good for as a pressing cloth. Like if you are working with Wonder Under, for example, or Steam-A-Seam or Heat and Bond, if you've ever worked with any of those fabrics, any of those adhesive mediums, especially Wonder Under, the other half of Wonder Under is essentially parchment paper. And you could always save the parchment paper. I had a friend that used to reuse the parchment paper. She used the ones that she got she'd do a bunch of applique using the Wonder Under, and then she would save the release paper. But you could also buy it. I buy it in bulk from the big warehouse stores. I use it also for my sublimation printing because it helps to keep the ink from blowing back and blowing all around. They call that blowback when you're doing sublimation printing and your ink, because the sublimation ink is a gas and it doesn't just stay directly where you want to put it. It can kind of seep out. And so it's a really good protective cover. And so if you ever work with like sticky mediums like the Wonder Under or the Steam-A-Seam or the Heat and Bond, and you put that on your ironing board, it will save you from a headache if you get a whole bunch of fusible stuck to your ironing board or a whole bunch of it stuck to your iron. The last couple of things from the grocery store that I think are that people might not think about so much, though I think they actually do. I think a lot of sewists, we tend to be a bit maybe frugal or creative thinkers, but I get my prescriptions from the grocery store, and I reuse or save my prescription bottles, after I peel the label off, so I can put bent sharps like broken needles, old needles, used needles. I'm looking at, I have a whole little stack of them right now. I'm trying to think about what other, basically sharp things. I've also taken to putting things like, loose staples and those kind of things in them. But that's a good way to store things. And the one last thing I would say about the grocery store is you can reuse. Oh, and one quick thing about the prescription bottles. I remember once calling a pharmacist or a pharmacy and asking them for like 20, to see if I could buy 20 blank pill bottles. And they were like, no. And I was like, oh, well, I can see why this might be a complicated question, considering you don't know what I'm using these for. And yeah, I thought that was really funny. I was like, it didn't occur to me that they wouldn't give it to me or let me buy it. But I'm pretty sure they were like, look, you're not going to have us losing our license giving you blank some prescription bottles. And I recently actually bought some used, someone else had been saving prescription bottles, and I bought them from her, just so I could save my old needles in. I always say I'm going to take them to the doctor on my next doctor visits because they dispose of sharps, but I've yet to do this. And I have 10 years of sharp broken needles in 1,000 prescription bottles, but no judgment zone. The last thing I would say from the grocery store is to look for interesting jars and bottles, like spaghetti sauce jars, jelly jars. And I feel like there's no need to really explain this because I think a lot of us who sew, at least if you've had people in your family that also sew, have a jar, a mayonnaise jar, an old salsa jar, or something full of buttons. I don't know where the buttons come from, but they always end up in the jar. So that's another way to store things. And now, of course, because we're all fancy, they sell jars, mason jars and things like that you could also use for the same purpose, but you could also reuse jars like that from the grocery store. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to announce the winners of our contest, so please stay tuned. And then we'll get into the last few things about sewing beyond, or sourcing sewing materials beyond the big box fabric store. Stay tuned. Here at Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, we talk a lot about sewing. But if you want to see and not just hear about some of the things we've been discussing, feel free to join us on the socials. You can find us at Stitch Please on Facebook, and you can also find us on Instagram at Black Women Stitch. You can find photos of projects that we've been working on, really interesting social commentary, and on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can join Black Women Stitch for a live Instagram chat. Again, that's every Thursday at 3 p.m. So find us on the socials, follow up with us. We are happy to hear your direct messages. You can reach out to us at the Black Women Stitch page on Instagram, and we'll help you get your stitch together. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome back to the Stitch Please podcast. You're listening to an episode called Thinking Outside the Fabric Store, or maybe it's called Sourcing Sewing Materials Beyond the Usual Suspects, or I'm not sure what exactly I'm going to call this episode, but the topic is how do we find things for our sewing in places that are not about sewing. And I think I just wanted to have people to expand their vision of where you can get the things you need in order to sustain your sewing. And that's why I wanted to show that there's so many different places that you can go and look, and there's so many unexpected and fun treasures that you can find in different places. So, but before we get back into that, and I'm going to end so the second and final half of our episode, we'll talk about what you can find at the hardware store, at the medical supply store, and at the thrift store, as well as a little tiny bit about variety stores. Before we get into that, we're going to announce the winners of our Yes, You Can Sew a Bra contest. These are the names of the people who have won a prize from they have won a prize from one of our 4 sponsors. So for the supporters of this episode, the supporters of this contest and this giveaway have given really cool prizes. Emerald Aaron has given a pattern and a bra kit. Bra Builders has donated a pattern and a bra kit. I said Emerald Aaron Bra Builders. Designs by Tosh has donated a swatch kit and a half yard of power mesh in your skin color. And Stitch Love Studios has donated a bra kit and a bra kit and a bra pattern. So those are 4 prizes that we have, and we have 4 winners. If you are one of these people, or if you know one of these people, get them to DM me as soon as possible so I can set them up with their prize. And if I don't hear from them, then I'll go on to the next set of people. But here we go. Shamika West, Miss Twisted and Turned, C Sews, which I have as CEESEWS, and Sew Natural Dane. These are the 4 winners of our contest. That's at Shamika West, at Miss Twist and Turned, at C Sews, CEESEWS, and at Sew Natural Dane. Y'all contact me, send me a DM, hit me up, and I will get you in touch with the prize that you have won. But congratulations, and thanks and shout out to the folks for donating and supporting. You can also look to Emerald Aaron and Stitch Love Studios, who, if you didn't win and your name was not called, there are still discount codes available. And Emerald Aaron's discount code is good for pretty much the rest of June, but I believe it might be June 20th, so you might want to check. I have that in the previous show notes for the bra episodes. And the Stitch Love Studios has a discount code that extends all the way through the end of the year. So if you didn't win and your name wasn't called, you can still get a discount on your purchases from those shops. So do check them out, and please, prize winners, hit me up. So I'm going to transition to the hardware store. The hardware store as a place to buy sewing things. This seems like probably the last place you would imagine that you could get stuff from, but actually Actually, I could probably do a whole episode just on stuff you can get from the hardware store. I really like hardware stores. They make me feel way more crafty and handy than I am. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've gotten from the hardware store that would be useful, I believe, for that have been useful for my own sewing. One of the things that if you think about some of the way of repurposing some of the materials that you can find at a hardware store, you can get, for example, PVC pipes, and you can ask the store to cut the PVC pipes to a certain height evenly for the number 4, F-O-U-R, PVC pipes to go on the legs of a folding table, and it will elevate that folding table from a height that's really low or good for sitting into one that's good for standing. So essentially, you can turn a folding table into like a standing desk by getting 4 PVC pipes in the proper diameter to slide over the legs of each table. I've done that with great success, and so it's nice because it brings the folding table to a good cutting height. I've also gotten like 1x2s, which are these kind of long, narrow boards, and use them to build a quilting frame. So that I don't quilt by hand, but I would do a lot of pinning by hand, and so I would use the 1x2 boards. I padded them, I wrapped them in fabric, and then I would clamp them, which you get clamps from the hardware store, and that would be a frame, almost like a picture frame, and I would wrap the base of the quilt, the quilt backing, and then put the batting on, and then put my quilt top on, and I could do my basting. I prefer to baste with safety pins, and it was just easier to get on all 4 sides. Now, because our house was small, I would do it outside, but it's a bit of a cumbersome process, but I was able to get a lot of great basting done with those set of tools that I got from the hardware store. So for that quilting frame. Another thing that you can use is you can find rotary cutting blades at the hardware store. They usually have those, I guess, in the carpet section, because carpet cutting blades and rotary blades are very similar, and I think depending on the blades you get, you can interchange them with the rotary cutter you already have. Other things that are useful is cording. They sell cording at the hardware store. Using washers. Again, I think this is also from the plumbing department, but washers, heavy washers, they make good pattern weights. I know people use those, and sometimes you can. I know folks who have wrapped their washers in grosgrain ribbon and use that as a pattern weight, or people who've just used them plain without the wrapping or decorating. There's also another thing that you can find at the hardware store, and this is like a metal. I don't know how to describe it other than saying it's a metal dish for screws. I went to a hardware store it's a pretty popular chain, and they have low cost discount materials, and they had part of their flyer was, when you checked out, you could get one of these free metal dishes, and I was like, oh. Okay, that's pretty cool. So basically, it's a nice thing to kind of throw your pins in. I think people usually use it for screws in the hardware context. Also, don't forget that at the hardware store, they have grommets, grommet setters, and eyelets. And these are really good things to get for like making like an anchor rack jacket. I've used grommets for different other craft projects, like if I'm making a certain bag, or if I want to use a toggle instead of a regular closure, if I want to put in 2 eyelets and grommets and just tie it with a bow. And I also really much prefer those grommets and the grommet setter to the thing that I have found in the fabric store, because it's just stronger and it's more durable. And so that's something as well to think about, grommet setters and eyelets. And finally, screen mesh. You can buy screen mesh at the hardware store, and that can be really good for. I know that there's a pattern for making a desk organizer. I believe it was a free pattern. I think that the Baby Lock website had it a long time ago, but I made one, and I have it on my desk still. And it's a bucket that has all of these different pockets on the inside and the outside, and the outside pockets are screen mesh that that are covered in bias tape made with fabric, and it's really pretty. It's a pretty cute thing, and it has a little handle that's covered in that's covered in fabric. So it's a really fun thing, and it's just a paint bucket, a small paint bucket that we got from the hardware store. And let me tell you just one last treat. And this was the thing about the fabric. And I think this is the cover. I know this is the cover art for today's episode. I got some fabric from the hardware store. And not only did I get the fabric from the hardware store, it was fabric that I really wanted from Marimekko, which is a designer in Finland, I believe. And they have fabric that they sell directly. They have fabric that they make their products out of, and they have retail stores in certain places in the U.S. And the Marimekko fabric that I was able to get, I got from, I guess I could just say it, I got it from Home Depot. How did I get Marimekko fabric from Home Depot, you ask? Marimekko makes sheets. And I ordered a set of full sheets, and now I have all of this great Marimekko small size of their kind of traditional pattern, and I am really looking forward to use it. I've already washed it. I've unpicked the seams from the pillowcases. I need to remove the elastic from the fitted sheet, but that's a lot of fabric for a reasonable price, and that's going to help me in the end when I talk a bit about thrift stores. That's another place you can get some really great fabrics from, is by looking at sheets. And because a lot of hardware stores, especially the bigger ones, are starting to sell more lifestyle products or life products or home products, you can get fabric in unexpected places if you call it sheets instead of calling it yardage. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about my Marimekko sheets. I think I've talked my friends' ears off completely about the doggone Marimekko fabric, but I'm really excited. It's going to be cute. So I'm going to switch from the hardware store to talk about the medical supply store. And here's a few things you can get from the medical supply store. You can get IV poles, which you really only need if you have a gravity feed iron. And I recommend gravity feed irons big time. They are heavy. They will save you the trouble of having to refill the tank of your iron, because I think I'm looking at mine now. I think maybe it's a minimum half a gallon. It might be an actual gallon of water that feeds into the channel or the piping of the iron into your actual iron itself. And the reason you need to have an IV pole is that the water reservoir has to be elevated higher than the iron in order for it to flow through. Now, I'm in an open ceiling studio in the basement of my house, and so I can hook up the water tank to that. But if you don't have that, or if you don't want to put holes in your ceiling or whatever, you can use an IV pole. Another thing that's great is exam paper. They, like when you go to the doctor's office and they have the paper that they sit on the benches, when you sit on the bench to get your exam, they sell those by the roll, and they make really good tracing paper for patterns. One last thing that I wanted to share is a hemostat, HEMOSTAT. And this is it looks like scissors, but it's really a clamp. And when someone first told me about hemostats, and I was like, I do not know why I would ever need such a thing. I'm not doing surgery, for goodness sake. But it's really helpful for pulling elastic through things. It's helpful if you're trying to pull a stubborn hand stitched pin or curved a hand stitched needle through something. I have right now about maybe 7. Oh, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had to move the sewing. Did I tell y'all I had to move the podcast studio down to the basement into the sewing room because my podcast was being recorded in my son's room when he was at college. And then when college closed, he came home and was a very strict executive producer who was like, Mom, record your podcast because I want to go back to playing my games. But until now, basically, the upshot is I'm in the sewing room and I'm looking at my collection of hemostats, and I think I do have about 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 on the wall and 2 that I keep right next to the machine because it's just a good, handy thing to have. And that brings us to number 7, thrift stores. Thrift stores are really great places to find like treasures. And some of the things that you might want to think about are sometimes folks just donate sewing stuff. So you can find sewing patterns, sewing notions, like they'll have sewing machines. You can also look at goodwill.com or shop Goodwill. I don't have the exact link, but if you don't want to go in store, you can shop online. But they have all types of stuff. I found some really great vintage notions in addition to great things like sheets and vintage luggage. Like I've gotten some really cute like little lunch boxes that are good for storing things, hat boxes I've got from the thrift store, all of these different ways that you can find or repurpose materials to build your sewing. And also sheets. Old sheets, single sheets, old curtains, all of these are, and they're usually sold for very, very little. And so you can make something with it, and if it doesn't work out, then basically you're using the fabric as a muslin that's going to let you practice your pattern before you actually sew it. And so the thrift store is a really great place for that. Between vintage notions, vintage sewing patterns, vintage sewing machines, you can also find vintage luggage, sheets, and other fun things for storage. Sometimes I also like to get like a really pretty like bowl or fish bowl. For some time, I think I might have gotten rid of this, but I was collecting vintage wooden thread spools. I think I am actually still collecting vintage wooden thread spools. I put them somewhere when I was cleaning up, and now they are safe from me because I don't know where they are. But that's something else you can get, just things you don't expect. And so you never will know what you're going to find. So I'm going to close this episode with just talking about some other stores that you might not think of for sewing things, even though I hear that that's changing. One of the favorite stores, my sister-in-law told me about this store. She introduced this to me years ago, and because she was getting stuff for her son's birthday party. And they live in Manhattan, and she was like, Lisa, there's a store here that has all kind of stuff, and you would love it. She doesn't like stuff like that, like little tchotchkes, little futzy things like this, or little cutesy things like that. But she went, of course, to get art supplies for her son's birthday, and they have these low-cost things. And it's called Flying Tiger. And it's from Copenhagen, but they have two stores in Manhattan. They have two stores in New York, one in Manhattan and one in Brooklyn. And the one in Manhattan is pretty much walking distance from her house. And I went over there, y'all, and I fell in love. Oh my goodness. They have all types of stuff. I bought little tiny sewing kits in little tiny metal boxes. I bought almost like a traveler's notebook style organizer. It was like $5. They have pens, pencils. They have little tiny, like I said, sewing kits. They have notebooks. They have all types of things. And I use that for sewing because I like to kind of keep notes, or if I'm at a conference. I love notebooks and stationery. I am such a nerd. I love pens, pencils, gel pens, notebooks, organizers, all of those types of things. And they have those kind of things at Flying Tiger. Similarly, this is a store I've heard a lot about, but have never seen one yet, and that's Daiso, D-A-I-S-O, which I believe is Japanese. But I have a friend who's in Texas, and they have one there, and they have a whole like sewing or craft department with cute things in it. So that's another place to look. And then dollar stores. Dollar Tree, I know, for example, has started to sell more craft and actual sewing things, including like fat quarters of fabric, I believe. And so that's just something I've been reading about because I haven't really been traveling that much. So I just thought that was just interesting to think about, not having to feel like if you don't shop at a big box fabric store, you have no way to get the things that you need. That's not true. There's lots and lots of independent fabric stores out there, lots of independent pattern makers and pattern designers. And then there's all these other places that we might visit with some frequency and not think about them as sewing related. And I hope that today I've given you some ideas about how you might visit the art supply, automotive, camping store, grocery store, hardware store, medical supply store, thrift stores, and other stores as ways to help you get your stitch together. That you don't just have to rely on the one big box store to get everything that you need. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Stitch Please podcast, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. There are a variety of ways that you can support the program, and you're doing it right now. By listening to the podcast, it does help us grow. Another way to do that is to rate the podcast, review it, subscribe to it. All of these things are ways that you can support the podcast without having to spend any money at all. If you would like to spend some money to support us, there are ways to do that as well. You can make direct donations to our Patreon site for monthly contributions, as well as one-time contributions to PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. And finally, we have another cute, very adorable way for you to support the Black Women Stitch Project. It's a pin, a PIN enamel lapel pin that's very cute. It's about 2 inches wide and 1.5 inch tall, and it's of the Black Women Stitch logo. And that is $15 with free shipping to the U.S. And so if you drop $15 in the PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App accounts, and then send me your if you send me your mailing address to my email, either at blackwomenstitch@gmail.com, or you send me a direct message on the Black Women Stitch Instagram page, we will put the pin in the mail to you. Again, free shipping, $15 for the pin, and all of this goes to support the Black Women Stitch Project. Thank you again for joining us this week. Come back next week and we will help you get your stitch together.